Good evening, everybody. This is Tim Rush in Leesburg, who hosts the Monday evening activist discussions and friends. Dennis Speed is unavailable tonight, so I'm substituting for him in terms of hosting tonight's discussion. We'll have Kirk Wiebe on to make a few remarks after I give a quick overview of things, and then we'll be opening up the lines for the usual discussion. I know that we've had intense activity flowing out of this magnificent 5 days of the commemoration of Lyndon LaRouche's 100th birthday, his centennial, last Wednesday through Sunday. So we should be getting some very immediate, sort of on-the-ground reports of much of that activity. So I want to highlight a couple of things for starters tonight. We could not be in a more sort of hand-to-hand combat situation in terms of which direction humanity is going to go. And I think highlighting the danger side of it, something that Helga Zepp-LaRouche called attention to earlier in the week, is this very significant upshift or intensification of provocations from the NATO forces, U.S., Britain, NATO, and so forth, operating through Ukraine to try to push Russia into, in turn, an escalation on its side, and basically lock it into a kind of you're approaching a nuclear chicken game very fast. And I don't say nuclear chicken game just as a kind of background or embedded feature. It's on the surface with an absolutely stunning statement from the top official of the Ukrainian military, a statement that he could not possibly have made if it wasn't something cleared through his NATO controllers, where he said, and this is an article that was actually issued around September 7th or 8th. He authored an article. There's a general named Valery Zalushny, and he says that there are indications that Russia is preparing a nuclear strike in Ukraine, and that it is therefore, and this is his quote, these are his words, extremely necessary that any Russian attempts at practical steps in the use of tactical nuclear weapons must be preempted by employing the entire arsenal of means at the disposal of world powers. Now just let that sink in for a moment. Preempted by employing the entire arsenal of means when you're discussing a potential nuclear strike. So this is very much in the minds of these madmen. It's out there in front, and at the same time, a number of very astute and experienced observers, such as Gilbert Doctorow, who's based in Brussels but has been very, very close to the situation for a very long time, he called attention, as others have, to the danger that that missile systems, there's one that has the acronym ATACMS, don't ask me what that means, but has a 300-kilometer range, be given to Ukraine. And there was a meeting in Ramstein Air Force Base, the U.S. territory in Germany, last Friday, I believe it was. Austin, the U.S. Defense Secretary, flew over there. Immediately, Blinken, Secretary of State, went on to Kiev. And clearly, there is an effort to jam a new heightened capability to attack Russia with direct NATO hardware into the middle of the situation. The Russians have reacted with vehement statements about red lines, that anything like this will carry the whole situation into a new realm. And Russia has already bombed 4 thermal power plants that basically supplied civilians in Ukraine, which is something they had not done previously. The fact that they've used the word a military a military operation, not a war, is not semantics. They actually have had very defined objectives that are not the occupation of Ukraine. It's not even the overthrow of the current Ukrainian government. It's clearing out these neo-Nazi operations and securing agreement from Ukraine that they remain neutral vis-a-vis Russia in strategic terms. So the special military operation could change, and this is a certain just an indication of what options are for Russia should it respond to these new heightened capabilities being jumped in here. So I wanted to outline that right from the outset, because this is not, these are madmen, but they are reacting to the fact that the sand is they're standing on sand, not on solid ground, in every other dimension around the world, and I think it's really important that we take that we never lose sight of the primary dynamic, which is a motion toward the kind of economics and statecraft represented in our age so powerfully and uniquely by Lyndon LaRouche. And I want to highlight in this regard what many of you have already seen, but I really want to call attention to it, an absolutely singular statement, a video, 14-minute video, released by Sergei Glaziev, the Russian economist, to commemorate LaRouche's 100th birthday. And I just wanted to read a few selections of this. I hope everybody has listened to it or read it or done both. Glaziev, just to give you a little bit more on his, let me just see if I can find this. Here we go. This is in one of our statements that we've posted. We have a 2-paragraph précis of who he is, and it's important to have this in mind. I'll just read it. Renowned Russian economist Dr. Sergei Glaziev sent a message of appreciation of the thinking and impact of Lyndon H. LaRouche, Jr. on the centenary of his birth, September 8th, to his widow and co-thinker Helga Zepp LaRouche, founder of the Schiller Institute. Glaziev is an academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences who has also held various posts in the Russian government since 1992. His book, Genocide, Russia and the New World Order, was brought out in English by EIR in 1999. As a member of Parliament, he headed up the State Duma's Committee on Economic Policy. In that capacity, in 2001, he invited Lyndon LaRouche, and Helga, by the way, to speak at hearings he convened on how to protect and develop the real economy in the face of a global financial crisis. In recent years, Dr. Glaziev has concentrated on Eurasian economic integration development. He's currently the Minister for Integration in the Eurasian Economic Union's executive body, and he has been at the center of very intense discussions with correspondingly high-level Chinese officials, and certainly also with India, around a series of proposals that he's been publicly identifying for creating currency arrangements that are outside the dollar but are linked to physical dimensions of the economy, various kinds of production, core industrial and raw material indices, gold, and so forth. This is one aspect of his work, but it's in full gear right now. What I wanted to quote from his statement is just the following. It's a relatively it's a 14-minute message, so it's quite extensive. He says, this is Glaziev speaking, "This year, progressive people around the world are observing the centenary of the birth of the brilliant thinker, and I wouldn't hesitate to say, prophet of our time, Lyndon LaRouche. If the leaders of the world's nations had listened to the voice of Lyndon LaRouche, then perhaps we might have managed to avoid the social upheavals we confront today as a result of the collapse of the world financial and economic system. If Lyndon LaRouche had been elected president, the world today would be developing in a stable fashion. There would not be the growing chaos. There would not be the worldwide wars and provocations. In practically all the major countries in the world that today are developing successfully, above all India and China, there are partisans of LaRouche. They have used his thoughts and ideas for creating their economic miracles. It is the principles of physical economy championed by LaRouche that today underlie the Chinese economic miracle and are there in the foundations of India's economic development policy. Lyndon LaRouche turned out to be right. Today we rely on his work, his writings, in composing proposals for a very rapid transition to a new world economic paradigm. As we can see, countries that are taking this path are enjoying success. We have to muster all our forces to fight that evil of war, and the creative legacy of Lyndon LaRouche helps in this. May his memory live forever. Now, I know Kirk will have some thoughts on this also in a moment, but I just want to highlight that this is an incredible intervention from Glaziev. We know the words that former President Jose Lopez Portillo of Mexico said to Helga at an event in, I believe it was 1998 in Mexico City. He had been out of office for 16 years at that point. But he said, and it was very important, he said, we must listen to the wise words of Lyndon LaRouche. Think how many other people, including in the United States, are actually in a position to say something like that. One of the most dramatic examples is the fact that Lyndon LaRouche, the author of crucial features of what Ronald Reagan presented to the world on March 23, 1983 as the Strategic Defense Initiative, was blacked out in terms of any U.S. public acknowledgement of his role, except for one very nasty front-page article in the Washington Post in 1995, when it looked like the somewhat chaotic office working on the idea on the strategic defense might be turning toward the deeper physical principles that LaRouche had been emphasizing, as against the kinetic weapon, missile intercepting missile of people like Danny Graham. And so suddenly there was a front page article saying, hey, did you know that it's that nefarious Lyndon LaRouche, the convicted felon Lyndon LaRouche, who's really behind this? That was the only coverage. And there's a very amusing but very telling anecdote that's recounted in memoirs from both Donald Rumsfeld and John Bolton, who went on a hurried trip to Russia in I think it was 2001, when early around June or July, George Bush Jr., the president, had just met with Putin and had agreed to Putin's urging that the two countries work on new strategic arms limitations and treaties and so forth, which is completely contrary to the neocon playbook, the unipolar playbook. So Rumsfeld and Bolton bolted over to Russia to clear up the mistake of the American president in listening to Putin. They held a day-long session with very top people, including the number two in the Russian military, and disabused Russia of any idea that the United States was seriously interested in any of this, which was something of a shock to the Russians. As they were preparing to go in for a dinner, the Russians said, by the way, you know who's the real author of the Strategic Defense Initiative, don't you? And Rumsfeld and Bolton looked up and said, shrugged, don't know. And they said, well, it was Lyndon LaRouche. Now, this is recounted in both of their memoirs. It obviously had a stunning effect on them because, their books all protest what an absurdity. How do the Russians are really off in La La Land if they thought LaRouche had anything to do with this. But it is, again, an indication of just how live among serious strategic and economic quarters around the world knowledge of LaRouche is, and that's why the Glaziev statement is so singular. He has put it all out in a dramatic public way, intervening in a context around the 100th birthday anniversary when the focus is on LaRouche already. And he did this at a moment just before. He just started today. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has a summit in Samarkand, the historic Silk Road capital of Uzbekistan, where President Xi of China is having bilateral meetings with Putin. He's going to have some sort of bilateral meeting with Modi, which is very, very significant. You've got Putin meeting with Modi directly, obviously. In other words, there is an intensity of deliberation where the quality of what Glaziev brings in from his knowledge of LaRouche, along with many others who are participating in this process, is taking a big step forward. This clearly is the area of intense planning and discussion right now. There are earlier meetings this year already put it in motion. So Glaziev's statement is now, we've translated into 7 languages. It's very important that people absorb the importance of what he says about LaRouche. That's why I read those particular quotes from it. And that the recognition of LaRouche as this great policy giant at this moment, just acknowledged, becomes a significant strategic factor in its own right. And we obviously have to make sure that that is circulated, is developed, amplified as much as possible, because it is a late stage situation in terms of the geopolitical drive for enlarged war that could easily become nuclear war. Now we'll be discussing later on tonight various aspects of what we're doing coming out of our events last week, and I won't add anything to those at this point. I will add something later, but I know we'll be getting some reports and I can fill stuff in. I just wanted to add 2 quick notices, and then we'll bring in Kirk. One is on the death of the Queen. We have an eloquent statement about this as the editorial in the EIR that was released this morning. And I want everybody to go to the LaRouchePub.com webpage and look this up if you don't get a subscription yourself. Very, very eloquent editorial. It's a cartoon. It's a cartoon that was actually done a number of years ago by Claudio Celani of our German and Italian organization. It shows the Queen, in all her royal regalia, pushing a baby carriage. And in the baby carriage is Charles, now King Charles III, then Prince of Wales. He has big Dumbo ears. He looks just as goofy as, it's a perfect rendition of him. And she's pushing him in the wheelchair, in the stroller. The caption that we put on it, which is slightly updated from the original one, says, "On Lyndon LaRouche's 100th birthday, the Queen of England stops pushing dope." So have a good laugh. This is the best way to cut through all this absolute insanity of media-led eulogies, etc. Most of the population is probably running for the barf bags, but it is a pretty suffocating environment. It'll only increase over the next 2 or 3 days going into the actual funeral. Then the last thing I want to mention, which is relevant to all of this, is that the Chinese, about 2 or 3 days ago, I think it was September 14th, which would just yesterday, announced a roadmap for the development of nuclear fusion energy in a very specific new way. What they're doing, they announced that they are going to go for a fission-fusion hybrid reactor, which is something that people like Edward Teller and others in the U.S. fusion area in the 1980s were talking about, and have a fully functioning unit of a fission-fusion hybrid by 2028. The idea is not fundamentally to produce energy out of it, though it will solve tremendous numbers of the engineering challenges that we need to work with. It will still leave certain other fundamental physics questions, scientific questions that need to be worked out. But in terms of the technical side of things, the development of the materials, and other things. This will be a tremendous advance. It's designed particularly to take used or spent fuel from current fission reactors, be able to recycle it. But they have then put a date of 2035 on a fission-fusion hybrid that would go into producing electricity for their grid. Now, the last time the United States had anything remotely like an actual timetable on fusion, and don't hold your breath on this. If you're under 42 years old, you have never heard of this. In 1980, a fusion energy bill passed the Congress called the McCormick Bill. Mike McCormick of Washington was the author of it, working very, very closely with the Fusion Energy Foundation. We turned out across the whole country and internationally tremendous support for this. It had an actual timetable, none of which was funded, and it all sort of vanished from anybody's thinking in the course of the 1980s and into the 1990s. And as people know, the U.S. fusion program is pitiful, though the people who are in it are doing miracles. So this announcement by China, very significant. At the same time, they have just announced Phase 4 of their lunar program, where Chang'e 6, 7, and 8 are now have mission assignments, and a lot of it will converge on potentials on the south pole of the moon, where, as they say, they don't have quite that they can get sunlight 180 days before darkness for 180 days, but it gives them a chance to avoid certain extremes of temperature variations in other locations on the moon. So I just wanted to, sort of put together in your minds as a one this kind of scientific, technological exuberance and acceleration with this Glasiev statement and what it betokens in terms of bringing LaRouche's real role in history in a way that cannot be hidden forward at exactly the moment that it's most needed. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up my start tonight, and I'd like to call on Kirk to add whatever he would like to say at this point, and then we'll open up the line for further discussion. I think people know Kirk. Certainly most of you would know of him. Former National Security Agency expert who exposed the NSA sabotage of systems along with Bill Binney, which could have targeted terrorists and prevented the 9/11 disaster. With Bill Binney, he walked out a few months after 9/11 and got more than just a casual visit from the FBI because of that. Was put through, he may want to mention something on this, put through some very serious consequences, but has stood his ground, a prominent member of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and we're very happy that you're with us tonight, Kirk.
Thank you, Tim. Great to be here with you and the audience, the LaRouche Schiller Institute audience. Just wonderful. I'm going to keep my comments pretty focused and short so that we can get to questions, which I always find the most fun part of any interface with listeners. Let me first of all say a word about 9/11, just a word. 4 days ago was the 21st anniversary of that tragedy. To this day, Tim and audience, I cannot explain why no one in Congress, no lawyer representing the 9/11 families has ever called me or Bill Binney or Thomas Drake, to my knowledge, to find out what we know about that event. Never have we ever been called. Now, how can that happen? Well, I'll tell you how. People have either been paid off or threatened not to go down that hole. People want 9/11, especially the responsibility for it, to go away. They don't want it discussed in court or in public discourse. But let's always keep in mind those who died innocently on that tragic day. Just a terrible thing to happen in these United States, and no one is found culpable. The other thing I want to comment on is the conference this past weekend, as well as the 100th anniversary of Lyndon LaRouche's birth. What a wonderful conference, and a restatement and echoing of the principles that Lyndon put in front of us all. And I so welcome the current effort to re-echo them and get them out to the general public. It's desperately needed. Along with that effort comes the comments that you pointed out by Russian economist Sergei Glyazov, and I listened to that 14 minutes today, as well as a longer excerpt from the exchange in the conference that Lynn and Sergei Glyazov attended as younger gentlemen back in 2001 on economics. I was very eager to listen to it and to see what Sergei Glyazov has said on Lynn's anniversary is so heartwarming and promising and hopeful. To my mind, it's an opportunity to take very positive action in response to Glyazov's statement. And I hope the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche organization, will reach out to Sergei Glyazov. And I hope they will reach out to other nations as well. We can't wait for Ukraine to be resolved. We cannot wait until someone else gets in the White House and backs off from this idiotic strategy of extenuating NATO and moving it even closer to Russia's borders. This is a very dumb-minded proposition and action by the U.S. and the UK and partners in Europe. It's aggression in its purest form. We have pushed Putin to the limits, and again, he has nuclear weapons. Would he set off a nuke, a tactical, one that has range of 300 kilometers would be considered a tactical as opposed to a intercontinental ballistic missile. But any kind of a nuclear weapon crosses a line and invites other people to respond in kind, and then you have simple escalation, and we see civilization as we've known it wiped out before our very eyes. Indeed, many of us, if not most, would not survive it. Now, but that doesn't mean that we don't have opportunities, and I think Glyazov's statement is a sort of a veiled invitation to engage, and we have to find a way to do that. We don't have to do it through the White House. We can do it on our own with other nations who are like-minded to leverage Lyndon's vision, the Eurasian Bridge for Russia. Russia needs to survive. It needs to feed its people like all nations, and they should be treated that way, treated in kind. It's kind of the human ethic that Lynn talks about. We must express our human ethics if we're going to get past these kinds of costly, deadly diversions, all caused by the global cabal who is manipulating the global economy support system, money, ideas, geopolitical affairs. You just mentioned one, Tim, the idea of nuclear fusion. Obviously, the U.S. had some inkling of what it was doing in that field back in 1980, and yet it disappears. And now China, independently, says we're going to do it. More power to them. Nuclear fission would be a boon to the world. It really would. And a wonderful thing in terms of supporting the global economic system. But we've got to break free from this cabal, these manipulations, these red herrings, these diversions that are costly both in money and human life. It is absolutely a tragedy. And with that, Tim, let me turn it back to you, sir.